I need to slightly further discuss how you would create bridges that are safe from temperature swings. Here it's not as bad of a temperature swing, but say like up there in Canada, Gibraltar Strait, 45 to 115 degrees. But if you get up here and you're trying to create a bridge across here by scamming Bay and Emonac, it's like my name, Emono, whatever. Okay, so the concept would be, um, if you have like a giant spring, right? That would be excessive amounts of metal, and you'd have to get it all to sprinky in different areas. But you don't have to have the spring go round and round. The spring can just be a snake coil, and each bridge pylon can be floating, or the bridge can be floating on the pylon. So it'll curve between one pylon to the next. So, like, if we go back over here, I'm not sure how many you would need, but the concept is you'd have a snaking motion, um, enough, however size. This is just the concept, and you would, um, like have the steel bending to whatever amount, and then like that's floating. So like the bridge structure, there would be like these flat areas on them, and then the metal would go across them without actually attaching and riveting into place. So it's free moving. And then at each point, it would curve, and then snake the other way, however big the snake is. And you could have like big shunt dials like that can change angles slightly so that the steel giant pieces with the overhead cable supporting them, um you'd have to do a design where, because it's snaking, each pylon area would have cables spun out from the bridge, like down the inside tube down under the water and out. And I'll describe that in a second. And then it would come out, different cables spinning out, and they would spin off of the top at different, the part sticking out of the water, and secure from underneath the bridge up at angles underneath, and then up above where they stick up above the height of the main levels of the bridge where the trains and cars are going to be going. Um, then you have the regular cables going down from above off of the spin of the. So, like, the concept is they're bigger spun, and then there's side cables that come loose from the spin as the column of the whole cable gets smaller, going down to the support to whatever point at the center before the other, support takes over from the other direction. Um, these are like spiraling out, so the topmost one would be really thick right at the point of the tower, and then as it spins out, that topmost cable would, as the spins however many, part of a algorithm of sprinky coiliness, um would branch off and connect down to the bridge at sharper angles downwards, and then the cable would get all the point to where it's much thinner at the center point, before the other one comes over from the next pylon. Now, how would you actually make these pylons? Say there's these ones where it's 1650 each area, and in between it's much deeper. So, there's of course an area they've discussed over here farther where it stays at like 1600 feet all the way across at most. And they're gonna put a bridge, or they're gonna put a tunnel for trains under there someday over here. But I'm talking about the regular old bridge for now for um, cars and animals, because yesterday was Animal Wildlife Bridge Day over freeways and stuff. So I realized I needed to state that, especially with this one, you'd have, however big it is, you could have one level for the trains and the cars, or three levels where you have cars and then trains and then the animal and person bottom, like pilgrimage walking biking corridor. And that level would attach right onto parks that are up, elevated, with like connections through into the mainland of the bigger wildlands and national parks. You would create wildlife corridors. Instead of having it be permanent city, you'd have park strips where people can hang out in parts of the park, and then there's specific, like, animals think they're sneaky, like zones where they humans don't hang out along streams and stuff that you create, and then the animals can migrate without interacting with humans, while humans can still use the parks. And then it gets through with that over to here, right? So the animals would get really quickly used to being able to migrate from Africa to Europe, which is very important. That needs to be able to be done. So you'd have to have it so that the animals would feel like it's just sort of like an island. They wouldn't know. And they'd be going out on the bridge. And you'd have to have, like, it'd be like a park with, like, you know, a path for humans that leads up in different points to the upper section for cars, and areas for cars to stop along the bridge on the edge, and then take like descents of stairs or elevators or whatever down a couple of levels to the walking biking area where you can like picnic and like whatever. So that level, I mean, wow, that sounds pretty appealing for animals too to get across. And over here, it would come across up into the parklands, and animals could, get out into these areas and go off into where they're gonna go. Um, let's see here. So I was gonna discuss, if you had big old ship barge things that were rectangular wide, um, you could come out to where it's deep, and you say you want to put in a pile-on here, then you would anchor it in place, of course, and have additional maybe ships around it with additional anchors on them, assisting in the whole process, whatever. And you would have, they're called elephant anchors, is what everybody called them. We came up with it originally. And they're kind of just like three legs, four, five, six, however many. And they're just kind of shaped like a amorphous elephant shape with the legs coming off of them at angles. And then you sink them, just enough ballast or whatever that you can then release from it if you want to bring the elephant anchor back up. But it's meant to stay there permanently. And you send down your, drills, and you drill along a pipe that you connect down to your elephant anchor point from the boat. And the awesome thing about it is having a drill go down that many feet and then have an angle, so then it drills at an angle in the elephant thing down there, is kind of a pain in the ass. And you can kind of make that easier pretty much fully by having the drill points be on um like other boats that are helping keep the center boat in place, right? And then they drilled an angle down to where the elephant is, and in through, and drill at different angles into the seabed deep enough and start injecting concrete from different from the main source at the center, of course, the ship. And this concrete, you have some sort of like cellulose something or other that maybe that would break down, but temporarily it wouldn't. So what you do is you fluff this concrete and spin it down into place and down into the drill marks to, solidify the base of the dam into the bedrock. And then you switch over to a new type of concrete for the actual pillars that are coming out of the elephant foot. So then, like, these pillars that would rise up to the level of, above the water would be, um, you could add magnetic flakes and you could have them two pipes, one bigger and one smaller, and the concrete kind of in between the two pipes. And then there's like paddles that are magnetically attuned that are spinning. Um, and you can kind of get it all frothed up to the point where it's slightly porous as it dries. And at the right point where it's drying and starting to change color up the length, then you pour in your either inject or pour it straight down, both probably, your like polymer resin, whatever it is, to make the concrete bouncy, springy enough for, earthquakes and shifting like that a little bit. And then um it all cures, and then the center of your big pillars, each of them is hollow. Like, how there's big buildings, everybody in high school, middle school have the, thing hanging from the ceiling, and you swing it and it swings back the same amount the other direction. Well, they put those in big towers, so you put them in these big towers of concrete, and they go down, and you don't have as much room, shaft chamber. So what you do is you have different points that are like fulcrum points along the length down it. You have little balls on there, and then magnetic rings on the inside, whatever, of the shaft all around the edges. And then these balls, of course, can be these magnetic points can be adjusted during earthquakes or whatever on the fly to create like juddering to cancel out the earthquake. And then at the lowest level down the elephant foot, where there's like a big sort of like rounded chamber, then the bottom heavy weighted ball swings around within that chamber, which is all magnetic in all directions, right? Pretty cheaply. Um, and this polymer down through the bridge can be either it through the columns, or you can run polymoid cables. Like I said before, you have lighted stuff down there. And the next section of what I described, if you can't actually have an overhead bridge, it's too far between locations, you would have to come in with a bunch of, like I said, barge ships or whatever, with boulders that you had carved with modern methods that I've described, um, that are all angled so that you would sink them with lines on them and buoys, to make them fall slowly. And you would create a, like, guide arch under the ocean that's really light, out of light materials, and then underwater doesn't weigh as much, right? And then this arch underwater at the point where the trench gets really extreme, like 1650 to 1650 here, right? um well, it's dropping all the way down to 21, 22, and then goes back up again 1650 around here and somewhere, yeah. Um, so the arch under there would probably be printed out. You'd have like a submarine that first you'd have a cable put across and then have like floaty bags so that the cable's shaped correctly in an arch. And then you'd come along with some sort of submarine thing that works along the cable before sea life grows on it. It's way down there, so I don't know how quickly it would. And then kind of fills in with a foam hardening like substrate that works under high pressure under there along the chain cable. And then you could come in after you have that hardened, and you could come in with a little bit, reinforced heavier stuff if you need to. But the point is, you just guide all these rocks down and they're all shaped perfectly so they all land next to each other and create an arch of stone that's heavy enough, each boulder, that they can't shift because of tides or earthquakes. And they'll kind of jiggle around during earthquakes and hold their position from the weight of gravity, anyways, if they're the right size and everything. And then they're all smoothly flush against each other. And this arch can then be used for my concept of magnetic tidal slash, um, you know, big electrical generation spinny blade fans under there. But there aren't blades because it would just be a big ribbon belt round thing. I described it before. And that would generate infinite amounts of energy. And then I described off of this, you could have your lit area under there with your glow polymers, and you could, for the fun of it, you could, in the health of the planet, you could bring in different life and coral stuff and start creating coral underground or underwater at high pressure coral experimentation with light sources you're providing. And of course that energy can go along the bridge and be used on land for factories and general electrical usage. This is pretty much an overview of the whole idea that we came up with, me and some other kids in Elko, like I always say. And that's about as succinctly as I can describe it. And from there, people can figure it out, I suppose. Thanks for watching. And I really do think during like a earthquake, the whole thing would bounce and recoil amongst its whole setup. And during extreme temperature swings, the whole thing can adjust torque flex angles, the metal, so it can bend at a more or less of a rainbow slightly as it snakes back and forth. So that, yeah, you don't have all that stress. It's naturally built to relieve itself of that stress. Like, I wish my spine would finish regrowing to do. Ouch. We're getting there. Okay. Bye bye.